Summer of 1943. The wheat fields of Europe were scorched under the strain of their retreat, their golden bounty turned to dust beneath the tread of boots and tanks. From those fields, where the very air still carried the acrid tang of smoke and iron, a procession of prisoners began their slow march towards confinement. Among them were women who had once wielded pens, bandages, and typewriters far more often than any firearm. Their attire still bore the sharp, precise creases of their former administrative roles, but their eyes reflected the profound weariness of an unending conflict. They had been warned that captivity meant starvation, the clanking of chains, perhaps fates even more dire. Yet, with each step into the unknown, a peculiar hollowness settled upon them, as if the very ground beneath their feet was shifting towards a reality that none could yet articulate. Lisa Lott Bauer kept her gaze fixed resolutely ahead, the tightly braided strands at the nape of her neck prickling with the warmth of perspiration. She was 22 years old. Trained as a nurse with the Red Cross, she had been abruptly torn from the sterile quiet of hospitals into a maelstrom of chaos, patching wounds that seemed to bleed eternally. She walked with a measured, dignified stride, though her palms were clenched tightly within her pockets, her fingernails digging crescents into her flesh. To her right was Anna Hoffman, nearly a decade her senior, who had once meticulously transcribed speeches within the grand marble halls of Berlin. Anna's lips were pressed into a firm, resolute line. Her silence served as a formidable shield, sharper than any blade. The train that conveyed them westward rattled with an palpable sense of uncertainty. Through its windows, fleeting glimpses of the world beyond the barbed wire flashed by. Children chasing chickens in dusty yards, farmers stooping low over their land. When the vast expanse of the ocean finally came into view, it was immense, a deep blue, and utterly indifferent. The women exchanged hushed whispers, voicing their belief that America would prove no different from the Russia they dreaded, merely another sprawling nation eager to humiliate its adversaries. Their commanding officers had assured them that Allied detention facilities would shatter both body and spirit. Anna, her voice like hardened steel, murmured, "At best, they will toss us stale bread and lock us in cages. At worst, well, we know what they have implied, yet what awaited them on the other side was not the harsh cruelty they had braced themselves for, but an unnerving strangeness. The camp's fences gleamed brightly under the afternoon sun, the taut strands of barbed wire stark against the azure sky, dotted with the lazy, aimless drift of clouds. Watchtowers stood sentinel, rigid and imposing, but within the confines of the compound, an order prevailed that felt disconcertingly ordinary. Wooden barracks, painted with meticulous precision, laundry lines strung with neatness, and in the distance, the sharp crack of a baseball bat echoed like an alien melody. Lisa's initial glimpse into the mess hall nearly shattered her carefully maintained composure. Inside, a machine hummed softly, dispensing a pale, cold sweetness into waiting bowls. Soldiers in khaki uniforms chuckled as they spooned dollops of ice cream onto plates already laden with hearty portions of meat and potatoes. On the tables stood rows of bottles filled with a dark, glistening liquid, their glass surfaces beaded with condensation. She recalled having seen the distinctive shape of such bottles in a Berlin cafe before the war, discreetly smuggled by diplomats. But here, they were displayed openly, row upon row, each bearing a bold white inscription. Coca-Cola. Anna's brow furrowed in suspicion. "A stratagem," she hissed under her breath. "Propaganda. They wish us to believe they possess mercy." Yet, even she could not completely mask the way her eyes lingered on the glistening, chilled glass. An American guard stepped forward, his voice carrying the distinctive rounded vowels of the American Midwest. Heinz Mirror was his name, though here, clad in uniform, he was known as Henry to his fellow soldiers. His grandparents hailed from Bavaria, and as he looked upon the German women, a flicker of something unspoken registered in his expression. He distributed the serving trays with a careful, almost detached demeanor, but when Lisa met his gaze, she perceived it clearly. Not hostility nor triumph, but a peculiar patience, as if he were silently imploring them to look beyond their ingrained suspicion. Captain James Donovan observed from a short distance, his arms crossed, the brim of his cap casting a shadow over a faint, knowing smile. He had overseen the arrival of hundreds of such groups, each one stepping through the gates with palpable dread etched into their very posture. He knew that precise moment well, the initial disbelief, the guarded awe, the gradual unraveling of ingrained propaganda when confronted by something as profoundly simple as a hot meal. He was fond of telling his men, "We fight wars with bullets, but we win them with hamburgers." The first spoonful of ice cream passed Lisa's lips, as if it were a dream too exquisite to fully grasp, a dream she feared might vanish. Vanilla, she thought the word, its syllables soft, almost romantic. She had envisioned sweetness forever buried beneath the ruins. Here, it melted far too quickly, a fleeting coolness across her tongue, disappearing before she could fully give it a name. Across the table, Anna pressed her spoon down with deliberate force, as if resisting the allure of lifting it. Finally, with a decisive movement, she tasted it. Her eyes widened slightly, a fleeting flicker of surprise. "Surprise!" she declared, then immediately chastised herself for her own reaction. "It is nothing," she muttered dismissively, "merely sugar and air." The Coca-Cola bottle presented an even greater enigma. Lei held it with a hesitant caution, as if it might suddenly erupt. The glass felt substantial in her hand, the cap hissing as it was pried open. She lifted it to her lips, experiencing the sensation of fizz for the very first time, the bubbles bursting like minuscule sparks against her tongue. Around her, laughter erupted, an American soldier teasing, "Careful there, miss, that's democracy in a bottle." Some of the German women offered nervous chuckles, while others regarded him with a defiant glare, uncertain whether the jest was an insult or an invitation. As the days unfolded, the stark contrasts became increasingly apparent. The prisoners were provided with 3 meals each day, offering more caloric intake than their families back home could even imagine. The guards were firm in their demeanor, but not cruel, engaging in casual conversations about baseball scores, prominent movie stars, or the scheduled dances on Saturday evenings. To the women, it felt akin to stepping into an alternate dimension, where war existed only as distant headlines in the daily newspapers. Yet, the ever-present barbed wire served as a constant reminder that this was not true freedom, but merely a carefully meted-out sliver of it, a peculiar form of mercy. Anna remained deeply suspicious, her bitterness a wellspring she steadfastly refused to abandon. "They are fattening us like livestock," she whispered one night in the barracks. "Do you not comprehend? It is to display their own purported civilization to their populace. Nothing here is genuine." But Lais could not dismiss the vivid memory of the tingling fizz against her lips, the melting cream dissolving into a sweetness she had never before encountered. If this was indeed propaganda, it was crafted from flavors she desperately longed to taste again. One evening, as dusk began to cast its rosy and indigo hues across the camp, Heinz lingered near the perimeter fence. He heard the German women humming a familiar melody from their homeland, soft, hesitant, and tinged with a mournful quality. He recognized the tune. It was the lullaby his grandmother used to sing. For a moment, he stood motionless, his heart caught between 2 distinct worlds. Then softly, he began to whistle along, his tune drifting from the other side of the wire. The women fell silent, startled by the unexpected sound. Anna narrowed her eyes, muttering the word, "traitor." But Lace tilted her head, her expression unreadable, her hands gripping the wire as if testing its formidable strength. The war raged on in the outside world, with the streets of Hamburg reduced to rubble and soldiers freezing in the eastern territories. But within the confines of the camp, the most profound shock was not the presence of violence, but rather the overwhelming abundance. Ice cream cones were passed from hands that had once meticulously rationed stale bread. Coca-Cola caps snapped open in rhythm with laughter that they did not yet fully trust. And yet, beneath the pervasive layers of suspicion and irony, a question began to take root in Laza's mind. If the enemy could so freely bestow such sweetness, what else in the world had been deliberately withheld from her? The night air carried a faint scent of pine and machine oil, the gentle hum of the ice cream maker drifting like a peculiar lullaby through the thin walls of the barracks. Lace closed her eyes, her tongue still faintly recalling the sensation of cold vanilla melting across it. For the first time since her capture, her grip of fear began to loosen. But, as she drifted toward a restless sleep, a guard's shout echoed from the far end of the camp. Something had arrived, something that would serve as a stark reminder that paradise, even when presented in generous scoops and convenient bottles, was invariably transient. The mornings commenced with the jarring clang of the mess hall bell, its metallic cry reverberating across the camp like an inescapable summons. The women stirred from their cots, layered with coarse blankets, their bodies still stiff from the memory of arduous marches and long train journeys. Yet, the atmosphere within the American camp carried no trace of apprehension, only the earthy aroma of freshly brewed coffee, the buttery promise of scrambled eggs, and the sweet cascade of syrup poured generously over pancakes. For Lisa L. Bow, each step taken toward the mess hall represented a silent negotiation between gnawing hunger and a lingering sense of pride, her stomach urging her forward while her conscience whispered a steady caution. Inside, the sheer abundance was almost obscene. Platters overflowed with meatloaf, bowls of mashed potatoes whipped to a creamy consistency, pies whose flaky crusts yielded to the slightest pressure of a fork, and always waiting at the end of the line, like an eternal promise, were the bottles of Coca-Cola. The glass shimmered with cold droplets, offering refreshment in a way that no propaganda leaflet ever could. The women accepted their trays with the rigid posture of soldiers, but ate with the uninhibited hunger of the civilians they once were. Spoonfuls were quickly conveyed to their mouths, as if they feared the bounty might vanish. Anna Hoffman remained an unyielding fortress. She ate with deliberate slowness, chewing with a profound disdain, like someone who refused to be conquered by mere sweetness. Her gaze remained fixed not on the food, but on the guards, meticulously studying their movements, searching for any hint of cruelty lurking beneath their smiles. She whispered sharp observations to the others, pointing out the way a guard's hand casually rested on his rifle, or the methodical sweep of the tower spotlight across the yard each night. "Do not forget," she implored them, "a cage gilded in sugar is still a cage." Yet, not everyone shared her profound suspicion. In the afternoons, after completing their chores and enduring the daily roll call, the camp transformed into something resembling ordinary life. American officers organized various classes, including English lessons, sewing workshops, and even lectures on the principles of democracy. For the male prisoners, there were labor details outside the wire, but for the women, the hours drifted into a peculiar sense of freedom. They braided each other's hair, mended torn hems, or sat by the barracks window, watching distant baseball games. The crack of the bat served as foreign music, a rhythmic and joyous sound that echoed against the wire, seemingly mocking its own purpose. Lace found herself captivated not by the intricacies of the game's rules, but by its sheer energy. She watched the players run in continuous loops, their faces illuminated by laughter that seemed to exist entirely outside the context of war. One afternoon, Heinz Maylor stood nearby, his cap tilted back, explaining in his halting German, "You see, 3 strikes and you are out. But if you run fast, you are safe." His words carried an unintentional poetry, and Leah smiled despite herself. "Anna," she called out, overhearing the exchange, scoffed, "safe in this place?" She turned away, but the corner of her mouth betrayed a fleeting flicker of envy at Leah's apparent ease. Numbers underscored the stark contradictions. Back in their homeland, ration books dictated every aspect of their lives. 800 calories a day was considered fortunate. Here, prisoners consumed more than 3,000. Lee remembered her mother's letters, the ink smudged with despair, the bread stretched with sawdust, the children fainting in schoolrooms. Each bite of pie in the camp was heavy with a profound guilt, a sweetness profoundly laced with sorrow. She wrote carefully in her own correspondence, deliberately omitting any mention of ice cream or soda, knowing that the unvarnished truth would inflict deeper wounds than any weapon. Still, the truth inevitably seeped into her. One evening, after supper, she sat outside the barracks, gently sipping from a bottle of Coca-Cola. The fizz tickled her throat, the bubbles rising like laughter she'd long forgotten how to express. She tilted her head back, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant streaks of copper and violet. For a fleeting moment, she felt suspended between 2 distinct realities, the desolate ashes of Europe and this improbable oasis of plenty. Anna joined her reluctantly, her arms crossed, her gaze sharp and critical. "You are forgetting yourself," she warned, her voice laced with disapproval. Lace answered quietly, Perhaps I am remembering who I once was. Camp life began to blur the established boundaries between captivity and ordinary existence. Music spilled from the radios in the guard huts, swing tunes with blaring trumpets that lifted spirits even when the lyrics remained incomprehensible. On some nights, the Americans organized dances, inviting civilian volunteers from nearby towns to mingle with the prisoners. The women observed from the shadows, the infectious rhythm tugging at their bones, a poignant reminder of their youth, so needlessly squandered on uniforms. Lee swayed unconsciously to the beat, and Anna seized her shoulder, gripping it as if it were an anchor. "Do not let them seduce you," she hissed fiercely. But even Anna's eyes lingered on the sight of the spinning skirts, the unburdened joy of strangers who had never experienced the terror of falling bombs. Rumors circulated with the wisps of smoke rising from the campfires. Some men embraced the re-education classes with fervor, fascinated by discussions of freedom and individual rights. Others remained defiant, clinging to their ideology as if it were a lifeline. The women stood precariously between these two extremes, uncertain which path to embrace. Lise felt the insistent tug of curiosity, a dangerous desire to believe in the possibility of genuine kindness. Anna, conversely, clung to defiance, convinced it was the only protective armor that remained for her. The surveillance within the camp was constant. Spotlight beams swept across the barracks at night. Boots crunched rhythmically along patrol paths. Towers loomed like silent, unyielding judges. Yet, within those confining walls, life bloomed in odd, defiant ways. One woman meticulously painted scenes of her homeland on discarded scraps of cardboard. Another composed poignant poems about the sheer absurdity of encountering ice cream in a prison camp. Humor sparked like a strike of flint. They nicknamed Coca-Cola soft war juice and shared quiet laughter at the irony of imbibing the enemy's pride directly from glass bottles. Even Anna managed a fleeting smile on one occasion, though she quickly buried it beneath her customary scowl. Lee began to grasp that survival within this peculiar environment was not merely about enduring hunger or violence, but about navigating the overwhelming abundance without losing her sense of self. Sweetness, she realized, was as potentially dangerous as bullets, for it blurred the critical line between enemy and benefactor. Each sip of soda seemed to soften her ingrained resistance. Each spoonful of ice cream threatened to melt away her suspicion. She wrestled with the profound guilt of her enjoyment, the sense of betrayal it seemed to represent, yet also acknowledged the fragile spark of hope it carried. One night, lying on her cot, she listened to the distant hum of the ice cream machine, its sound steady and constant, like a human heartbeat. The noise was absurd in its comforting presence, yet it lulled her, weaving its way into dreams populated by idyllic gardens and joyous laughter. She awoke to Anna's voice in her ear, sharp and imbued with certainty. "They desire you to forget the rubble," Anna declared, "but the rubble is all that awaits us." Lei turned her face towards the window. Beyond the perimeter fence, the guard towers glowed like vigilant, watchful eyes. She thought of Heinz's clumsy attempts at German, of Donovan's knowing smile, of the sweetness that dissolved far too rapidly on her tongue. She could not definitively determine which was the greater peril, the fences that held her physical body captive, or the overwhelming abundance that threatened to ensnare her very heart. Then, in the profound hush that preceded the dawn, a new sound pierced the established rhythm of camp life, the deep roar of trucks pulling up just outside the wire. Headlights swept across the barracks, blindingly sudden, casting long, distorted shadows over the cots. The women sat bolt upright, their breaths quickening, scattering half-written letters across the floor. Orders barked in English, boots striking the ground with an urgent cadence. Something significant had arrived, and with it, the fragile illusion of sweetness shuddered. The women exchanged glances, their hearts tightening with a shared premonition. Whatever solace the ice cream and Coca-Cola had promised was about to be rigorously tested, and none could yet predict whether this newfound comfort had rendered them stronger or merely more vulnerable. The trucks that had thundered into the camp did not disgorge executioners or shackles, but instead crates. Endless stacks of supplies that carried a faint, distinct aroma of cardboard and sugar. The women watched as the soldiers unloaded them, sweat darkening their khaki shirts, their laughter easy and unguarded. The boxes bore the familiar, cursive inscription, Coca-Cola, Alongside them arrived tins of peaches, sacks of flour, and barrels of coffee. It served as a stark reminder that while Europe withered and starved, this country overflowed with plenty. Abundance filled the women's bowls, yet it also unsettlingly disrupted their loyalties, planting persistent questions within the silence of their nights. Lisa Bauer felt those questions stirring within her chest. With each sip of soda, she no longer recoiled from the effervescence, but instead welcomed it, the bubbles pricking her throat like tiny sparks of something dangerously alive. She found herself laughing more frequently, her smile uncoiling when she witnessed Heinz Maylor stumble through his German explanations, or when upbeat swing music spilled from a nearby radio. And every time she laughed, guilt followed close behind, sharp and piercing as broken glass. Her letters home became increasingly difficult to compose. How could she possibly confess to her mother that captivity provided her with better sustenance than freedom ever had? Anna Hoffman observed the subtle change in Lisa and reacted with undisguised disdain. She sharpened her words into potent weapons, striking at Lisa and any other woman whose gaze softened towards their captors. "Do you truly believe kindness can erase the memory of bombs?" She snapped one evening, her voice slicing through the communal space of the barracks. "They devastate our cities by day and attempt to charm us with sugar by night. It is all a grand theater, and you," her gaze pinned Lisa directly, "are the audience they desperately crave." The other women shifted uncomfortably, unwilling to openly align themselves with either faction, their loyalties splintering in quiet, internal ways. The camp itself seemed to conspire in fostering this division. The Americans organized lectures where prisoners could learn about democracy, the principles of free speech, and even the practical mechanics of elections. Some of the men attended these sessions with eagerness, diligently scribbling notes and posing thoughtful questions. Others scoffed openly, muttering that it was nothing more than insidious brainwashing. For the women, the choice was far subtler, yet no less fraught with consequence. To listen was to acknowledge a burgeoning curiosity. To refuse outright was to maintain a steadfast position, but one that felt increasingly empty. Lace attended one such lecture, sitting unobtrusively at the back, her ears prickling at unfamiliar phrases like rights of the individual and government by the people. She had been rigorously taught only the monotonous chorus of obedience. These new notions startled her with their inherent strangeness. That night, she confessed her feelings to Heinz, who lingered by the fence, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. "It sounded different," she admitted softly, her voice barely a whisper, "as if life could belong to me, not solely to orders." Heinz exhaled a plume of smoke into the twilight. "That's the idea," he said simply. His accent noticeably bent the German words awkwardly, but the sincerity in his eyes remained unwavering. Lei looked down at the ground, a nascent fear that Anna might be observing them. Yet, a part of her desperately wanted to hold on to that simple sentence, much like she would grip a bottle of soda with both hands, terrified of letting it slip and fall. Anna's resistance deepened with every crack she perceived in the resolve of others. She began to gather a small, dedicated circle around her, women who muttered darkly about traitors and vowed to return home utterly unchanged. They shared hushed stories of German victories long since turned to dust, clinging to rumors that kept their sense of national pride alive. "Better rubble than chains," Anna insisted vehemently, her voice carrying the profound weight of someone who refused to surrender, even to the insidious allure of kindness. But her conviction began to tremble at night when she dreamed of burning Berlin streets, only to awaken to the comforting scent of cinnamon wafting from the American kitchen. Holidays served to further blur the already indistinct line between captivity and a perverse parody of normal life. At Christmas, the Americans adorned the mess hall with festive garlands, erected a tree strung with popcorn, and even distributed small gifts, bars of soap, packets of candy, and cigarettes. On each table stood bottles of Coca-Cola, their red caps adorned with miniature paper Santa hats. The women stared at these bizarre arrangements in stunned silence, the absurdity of the scene almost unbearable. Some erupted into laughter, while others dissolved into tears. Lays raised her bottle cautiously, the fizz popping like distant sleigh bells in her ears. "Fro Acton," Heinz said gently from across the room, his voice carrying a warmth that startled her. Anna clenched her fist tightly, outright refusing the offered bottle. Later, she muttered with fierce determination, "Do not allow them to rewrite what Christmas truly means. Do not let them make you forget." The internal conflict deepened with the arrival of letters that trickled in from their homeland. They spoke of pervasive hunger, of bustling black markets, of children too frail to even stand. Leiza's sister wrote of their mother rationing her own meager portions to ensure the youngest child would survive. Reading those words, Lee felt the substantial weight of the pie she had consumed hours earlier settle like cold lead in her stomach. She longed to send sustenance through the envelope, to trade every drop of soda for a single crust of bread in her mother's desperate hands. Instead, she folded the letter with meticulous care, hiding it beneath her pillow, and ate her meal in profound silence the following day, her appetite irrevocably spoiled by a gnawing shame. But shame, she was discovering, was not a sufficient bulwark to silence her burgeoning curiosity. One evening, a radio played the jaunty tunes of Benny Goodman, the clarinet weaving through the camp air like a bold dare. Lee allowed herself to sway just slightly, her body instinctively remembering the exhilaration of dances held before the imposition of uniforms. Anna noticed this subtle movement and seized her wrist with unexpected force. "Do you genuinely wish to become American?" she hissed, her voice sharp with suspicion. Lace met her gaze, momentarily startled by the sheer vehemence of the question. "I wish only to be human," she whispered back, her voice barely audible. A palpable stillness lingered between them. Fragile and hazardous, the unspoken words hung heavy. For once Anna found herself without a ready retort. Though levity still flickered, it now carried a sharp edge. The women bantered about their dietary choices, joking that they'd eventually return to Germany as plump as dumplings, while their families back home were wasting away. They affectionately dubbed the ice cream maker the Miracle Engine, and playfully chided Hines for reiterating the rules of baseball for what felt like the 100th time. Even Anna managed a brief chuckle when an old sergeant grumbled that Germany's defeat wasn't due to enemy tanks, but to the pervasive allure of vanilla. Nevertheless, this laughter was thin, like delicate glass poised to shatter. Beneath its fragile surface lay the gnawing awareness that each moment of indulgence felt like a betrayal of the devastation awaiting them across the ocean. The stark silhouette of barbed wire bisected the horizon, a stark reminder that all comforts came with inherent limitations. Guards maintained their patrols, searchlights cut through the darkness, and the established regulations remained unyielding. The return of a prisoner apprehended during an escape attempt, bloodied and bruised, though subsequently receiving medical attention, cast a somber pall over the entire camp. The incident served as a chilling reminder to the women that acts of compassion did not negate the reality of power, and that a simple bottle of Coca-Cola could not dismantle the formidable fortifications of oppression. For Leigh, this was a sobering confirmation. For Anna, it was vindication of her steadfast warnings. "You see," she addressed the assembled women in their barracks, "this sweetness is merely a ploy to dull your senses. The wire is the unvarnished truth." Yet, even Anna's conviction couldn't entirely quell the burgeoning questions in the minds of others. What if the truth possessed greater complexity? Could kindness and cruelty truly coexist, each undeniably real and potent? Lee's mind wrestled with this duality through sleepless nights, her heart torn between guilt and the tantalizing flicker of possibility. She envisioned her mother receiving much-needed parcels of food, her mind conjuring images of her own freedom, walking unburdened into a world where her choices would be her own. But then, Anna's fierce, unyielding voice would intrude. To accept kindness, she argued, was to betray loyalty, to dilute the memory of those enduring suffering back home. The chasm between these perspectives widened with each passing day, creating an invisible divide within the camp. Some gravitated towards curiosity about the outside world, while others clung tenaciously to their defiance. A thick, suspicion-laden silence stretched between these opposing viewpoints. Hines, too, sensed this growing tension, his patrols becoming heavier, his gaze lingering on Lee's with a quiet, almost paternal concern. Captain Donovan observed the unfolding dynamics with his customary detached professionalism, noting in his official reports that the women grappled more with matters of loyalty than with physical hunger. He understood this was a battle waged in silence, fought with each spoonful of their carefully rationed meals. As spring tentatively unfurled its gentle embrace upon the camp, delicate blossoms bloomed beyond the confines of the wire, their faint fragrance drifting into the barracks. Life, with an indifferent grace, continued to press forward. The women watched the buds transform into flowers, their own loyalties becoming as tangled and contested as the delicate petals themselves. Lee paused, bending to retrieve a petal that had drifted through the fence. As she held it with delicate care in her palm, Anna caught her eye. One held a spark of wonder, the other a stark warning. That evening, as darkness enveloped the camp, news arrived, carried on a contraband scrap of paper, passed from one prisoner to another. Germany was faltering, its cities consumed by flames, its fronts collapsing. The women absorbed the words in hushed silence, their weight laden with an undeniable inevitability. Anna's fingers clenched the note, her jaw set in rigid defiance. Leigh felt her breath catch in her throat, the lingering sweetness of Coca-Cola still on her tongue. If their homeland was crumbling, then surely the gates would soon swing open. But to what awaited them? The question struck her with a force far exceeding that of any bomb. As she closed her eyes, the effervescence still danced on her lips, and she understood, with profound clarity, that her true confinement was not the barbed wire. It was a choice that would soon be thrust upon her. The spring of 1945 did not arrive with the gentle unfurling of blossoms, but rather with a persistent hum of rumors. These whispers traveled through torn fragments of newspapers, carried on hushed radio broadcasts, and echoed in the restless silences of guards whose laughter had diminished. For months, the camp had existed as a peculiar island of relative plenty, seemingly insulated from the disintegration of the Reich. Yet, the illusion was now rapidly thinning. Even within the confines of the barbed wire, the women could sense the world tilting precariously, as if history itself had accelerated its headlong rush toward its conclusion. Lisa Lottbauer felt this shift most acutely through the abrupt cessation of correspondence. Her mother's letters, once filled with hurried lines of worry and hunger, eventually simply stopped. The final missive spoke of the terrifying wail of sirens over Hamburg, of neighbors disappearing beneath pulverized debris, of children languishing with gnawing hunger. No subsequent replies arrived. Each day Luz anxiously checked the mail, her hands trembling as they encountered only an empty slot. While the food provided here sustained her body, the silence was hollowing her spirit. She clung to the fading echoes of her mother's voice, fearing its eventual complete disappearance. Anna Hoffman, in stark contrast, grew more resolute with every piece of news concerning Germany's impending defeat. Where others allowed sorrow or hope to soften their resolve, she constructed an ever thicker armor. "Their objective is to render us weak," she declared to the women in the barracks, her voice laced with an unyielding resolve. "They desire our gratitude so that when Germany falls, we forget our true identities. Do not permit them to achieve victory within these confines as well." However, even Anna's steely resolve faltered upon hearing reports of Berlin engulfed in flames. One night, Lee discovered her clutching a small locket in the darkness, softly whispering a name she would never openly confess. Beneath the veneer of defiance lay a profound grief she dared not share. The camp itself mirrored the turbulence of the external world. While supplies remained plentiful, the guards exuded impalpable tension, their voices sharper, their radios perpetually tuned to the news. Heinz Mayer, the German-American guard who had once explained the intricacies of baseball with such youthful ardor, now carried a palpable weight upon his shoulders. His glances toward Luz grew more prolonged, tinged with an unspoken depth. On one occasion, as he handed her a bottle of Coca-Cola, his hand lingered for an extra beat as it passed into hers. Neither spoke, but the air between them thrummed with unspoken emotions. Captain Donovan maintained his routines with practiced detachment, yet even he betrayed subtle signs of disquiet. He no longer made jovial remarks about hamburgers winning wars. His reports became terse, and he patrolled the camp with the measured gait of a man acutely aware of time's relentless march. Lee occasionally observed him studying the prisoners not merely as captives, but as individuals destined for a future, women who would soon return to a shattered homeland, carrying within them the indelible impressions of America. He seemed to ponder the narratives they would weave upon their return. Then, one morning, the official announcement resounded. Germany had capitulated. The war at least on this side of the Atlantic, had concluded. The words fell upon the camp like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples of profound emotion through every soul. The guards erupted in cheers, their rifles raised skyward, their laughter echoing beyond the fences. The prisoners, in stark contrast, stood frozen, their faces pallid, their eyes wide with the stark realization that everything they had known, for better or worse, had irrevocably vanished. For Lay, the news was a paradoxical mixture of relief and dread. The conflict that had consumed her formative years was over. Yet, the prospect of returning home filled her with an overwhelming sense of apprehension. Home was a landscape of rubble, hunger, and a silence where her mother's voice should reside. She pressed a hand to her chest, her heart pounding erratically, uncertain whether the rhythm pulsed with hope or terror. Anna's reaction was immediate and visceral. "Can you not see?" she hissed, her grip tightening on Lace's arm with bruising intensity. "They will send us back now, back to utter desolation. All of this," she gestured emphatically at the camp, at the abundance of food, the comfortable beds, the sweet diversions, was merely a performance designed to make us forget what truly awaits us. Do not be deceived by their smiles. Our suffering will commence anew the moment we cross these fences. The subsequent days blurred into a flurry of preparations. Directives circulated, informing the women of their impending repatriation, their return to Germany by vessel. They meticulously packed their meager possessions, cherished letters, salvaged scraps of fabric, and sketches conceived during idle afternoons. Some wept silently, while others moved with an almost rigid discipline. The barracks, once alive with the low hum of daily routine, now vibrated with the profound weight of anticipation. Each woman understood, with stark clarity, that she was poised to exchange a period of abundance for a future steeped in ashes. On their final evening, the American forces hosted a farewell supper in the mess hall. The tables groaned under the weight of the feast. Succulent roast chicken, buttery corn, pies crowned with mounds of cream, and, centrally displayed on each table, rows of Coca-Cola bottles, their glass glistening as if illuminated from within. The women sat in silence initially, an unspoken chasm separating their full plates from the gnawing hunger awaiting them across the vast ocean. Then, Donovan's voice, steady and formal, broke the quiet. "Ladies," he began, "tomorrow marks your departure for home. Tonight, we share this meal as a final farewell. May it serve not as a reminder of captivity, but as a testament to possibility." His words resonated deeply with Leah. She surveyed the faces of the women with whom she had shared her existence, noting Anna's rigid silhouette and Heinz, leaning in the doorway, his eyes unreadable. She slowly lifted her bottle, unscrewing the cap. The sharp hiss echoed through the profound silence, a definitive release of something long held captive. One by one, the others followed suit, until the hall was filled with the collective chorus of fizzing glass. She took a sip. The bubbles danced across her tongue, a familiar sensation, yet still startling. The taste of a world that seemed impossibly distant from the ruins that awaited her. She thought of her mother, of the gnawing hunger, of the letters that had fallen silent. She recalled Heinz's hand brushing against hers, Donovan's quiet conviction, and she understood that this sweetness was not merely sugar, it was memory, it was choice. It was a fragile, elusive possibility of life emerging from the ashes. Anna resolutely refused her bottle until the very last moment. She sat rigidly, arms crossed, her eyes burning with defiance. But as the silence stretched, she suddenly reached out, unscrewing the cap with a forceful twist. She raised it high, her voice cutting through the hushed hall. "For Germany," she declared with a bitter edge, and drank. The gesture was a complex blend of defiance and reluctant surrender, an implicit admission that even she could not wholly resist the allure of sweetness, though she masked it with acrimony. That night, sleep proved elusive. The barracks resonated with whispered prayers, muffled sobs, and nervous laughter. Lay awake, the lingering taste of her last sip still tingling on her tongue, as if it had seared itself into her memory. She heard footsteps pause outside her door, followed by Heinz's voice, soft, almost breaking. "You will see America again one day." She offered no reply, but her heart surged with a dangerous flicker of hope, a feeling she quickly buried beneath her blanket. At dawn, the trucks arrived. The women filed out, their breaths misting in the cool morning air, their belongings clutched tightly. Guards lined the path, their faces now solemn, stripped of any celebratory jubilation. Donovan stood at the gate, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze sweeping over the departing women, as if memorizing each individual. As Lee passed, he offered a single nod, an acknowledgement, a farewell, perhaps a silent wish. Before boarding, each prisoner received a final parting gift, a single bottle of Coca-Cola. The glass felt cold against their palms, condensation beating on their skin. Lee clutched hers tightly, as though it represented both an anchor and a torch. Around her, other women held their bottles with the reverence usually reserved for sacred relics. Anna scoffed, muttering that it was nothing but sugary water. Yet, even she gripped her bottle as if it contained something far more significant. The trucks rumbled forward, carrying them toward the ships, toward ruin, toward futures that remained shrouded in an unknowable mist. Leah sat with the bottle pressed against her chest, the engine's vibration resonating through her bones. She closed her eyes, recalling the melting ice cream, the swing music that had once drifted through the wire, the unexpected bursts of laughter that had punctuated their confinement. She thought of her mother, of the persistent hunger, of the arduous task of rebuilding. And she thought of the sharp hiss of the cap, the effervescent fizz that had risen like a promise. As the camp receded into the distance, its fences shrinking against the vast horizon, she understood that the war had etched scars upon her that would remain forever. Yet, in her hand, she held a symbol of something far grander than their captivity, a memory of sweetness amidst utter devastation, a stark reminder that even while bound, she had glimpsed an alternative world. She lifted the bottle to her lips, savoring the last lingering drop. It burned and sparkled, both overwhelmingly sweet and fleetingly brief, a taste destined to haunt her long after the glass was empty. And in that precise moment, as the dawn split the horizon with its first light, Lee realized this was not an end but a threshold. The wire no longer held her captive. Her true challenge now lay beyond its confines. The truck jolted. The bottle clinked against her teeth, and she swallowed hard. She turned her face toward the uncertain road ahead, her eyes wet, yet unwavering. The world was broken, but somewhere within its ravaged landscape, a promise had been made. A promise as delicate and explosive as the fizz that still tickled her throat. And though she could not yet articulate its nature, she knew she would spend the remainder of her life pursuing its echo.